I am Arthur, 32 years old. 10 years ago, my own family decided I was the worthless son because I chose a different path than the one they had aggressively mapped out for my life. While I was pouring every single ounce of my soul, my sweat, and my sanity into building my future from absolutely nothing, my parents told me my life was a complete and utter embarrassment. They laughed at me in front of our entire extended family at our annual Thanksgiving dinner, treating me like a pathetic failure while parading my older brother Julian around because he drove a collection of luxury cars. "Still taking public transport, Arthur?" my mother taunted, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet pity that was entirely manufactured for the audience in her living room. "Your brother has 3 cars. It is just pathetic." But there is one massive thing they did not know. They had absolutely no idea that the son they were so brutally mocking wasn't just riding the city bus because he had to. I was riding that bus by choice, to stay grounded and invisible while I single-handedly built a $2.8 billion aviation empire. And in less than an hour from that very moment, they would be standing frozen in absolute terror and disbelief as my private fleet of executive helicopters descended upon the very backyard that I secretly owned. Before I tell you exactly how I shattered their perfectly curated illusions and brought my toxic family face-to-face with a financial reality they couldn't buy their way out of, hit that like button if you believe in true justice. And please, do not forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Your support means everything to me. Now, let's go back to where this nightmare disguised as a holiday actually started. The bus ride to my parents' house for Thanksgiving had been exceptionally quiet, almost eerily so for a Thursday afternoon in late November. I always chose the window seat near the back. It gave me time to think, to watch the sprawling suburban landscape of the city roll past, while the other passengers either dozed off against the cold glass or mindlessly scrolled through their smartphones. It certainly was not the most glamorous or prestigious way to make an entrance at a highly competitive family gathering, but it served my specific purposes perfectly. Growing up in a household that worshipped appearances, I had always been the fiercely practical one. While my older brother Julian treated luxury cars like disposable fashion accessories to mask his deep insecurities, I was perfectly content with utilizing public transportation, walking miles to my destinations, or catching an occasional rideshare when the weather turned vicious. To my mother, Evelyn, my lack of a personal vehicle wasn't a practical choice. It was a loud, glaring neon sign declaration of my failure as a man. To my father, Richard, it was premium comedy material. He turned my lack of a car into a running joke at every single family event, a reliable punchline he could dust off whenever the conversation at the dinner table ran dry. I pulled up to their upscale suburban neighborhood at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The city bus stop was just 2 long blocks away from their sprawling house, a distance I had perfectly calculated so I could walk the rest of the way, feel the biting November wind against my face, and mentally prepare for the psychological warfare I was about to walk into. As I approached the wide, perfectly paved driveway of my childhood home, the visual contrast was almost comical. Julian's pristine, glaringly white Porsche was parked right in the dead center, practically demanding attention. It was flanked by his aggressive red Lamborghini on the left and a heavy black Range Rover he had supposedly acquired just last month on the right. 3 incredibly high-end, maintenance-heavy vehicles for one single man who lived entirely alone in a downtown loft. I walked up the pathway, my practical leather boots crunching against the few dead leaves that had escaped their meticulous lawn care service. Before I even had my hand fully extended to grasp the heavy brass doorknob, the front door swung wide open. There she was. My mother stood in the doorway wearing an apron over a designer dress, greeting me with a smile that was strictly for show, tight around the edges, forced and entirely absent from her cold eyes. "Oh, look everyone, he actually made it," she announced, her voice carrying loudly down the polished hardwood hallway so every single relative currently sipping wine in the living room could hear her clearly. "Did the city bus run on time today, Arthur? I know how incredibly unreliable public transportation can be, especially on a major holiday. You must be absolutely freezing standing out there at those dangerous stops." "The bus was perfectly fine, Mom," I said smoothly, stepping inside the warm house and taking off my heavy wool coat. She did not miss a single beat, immediately launching into the exact speech I knew by heart, the one she had rehearsed for this specific occasion. You really, truly should let your father help you with a down payment on a reliable used car, Arthur. Something practical for your situation. A used Honda, maybe, or an old Toyota. It is getting deeply embarrassing, honey. You are 32 years old. Riding the bus alongside teenagers and vagrants like you are still a struggling college student. It doesn't look good for the family image. I just smiled a polite, completely hollow smile and changed the subject by complimenting the smell of the roasting meat. There was absolutely no point in explaining to her that I did not need a car when I was already orchestrating global logistics on a scale her suburban mind could not possibly comprehend. I walked past her and stepped into the expansive living room, where the air was thick with the rich scent of turkey, expensive heavy cologne, and heavy, suffocating judgment. Julian was already holding court on the large leather sofa, dressed in designer clothes that practically had the price tags still hanging off them to ensure everyone knew their worth. He was lazily swirling a glass of expensive bourbon, playing the role of the wealthy patriarch despite being only 2 years older than me. He looked up when I entered, his expression instantly shifting into that deeply familiar, highly punchable mix of superiority and mock sibling concern. Well, if it isn't Arthur. You actually made it, Julian announced to the crowded room, gesturing toward me with his crystal glass. Did you have to take 2 or 3 different buses today to get to the suburbs? I know the holiday transit routes can be an absolute nightmare to navigate for regular commuters. Just one bus, actually, Julian. It was a direct route, I replied calmly, refusing to take the bait. My dad emerged from his oak-paneled study, clapping his hands together loudly. The transit rider returns to the nest. Julian, did you take Arthur outside to show him the new Porsche yet? Top-of-the-line engineering. Now that, Arthur, is exactly what true success looks like. I set my overnight bag down carefully by the edge of the grand staircase. It is a very visually striking car, Julian. My dad let out a harsh, barking laugh that echoed in the high-ceiling room. Visually striking? Arthur, that is a $150,000 piece of high-performance machinery. Meanwhile, you are spending what? $2.50 per bus ride? You are really putting that expensive college degree we helped pay for to work, aren't you? My phone buzzed heavily in my tailored pocket, a familiar, continuous vibration signaling a priority executive message from my corporate operations center. I ignored it for the moment, keeping my hands empty and my posture relaxed. But the annual Thanksgiving interrogation had officially begun, and I knew from years of bitter experience that this was merely the warm-up act. I thought the worst of their mockery was over when I finally sat down in the corner armchair. I was so incredibly wrong. To fully understand the absolute mind-bending absurdity of the dynamics in that living room, you have to understand the decade of painful history that led directly up to this exact moment. 10 years ago, when I was 22 and fresh out of university, my beloved grandmother passed away. Her funeral was a bleak, rainy affair, but she left behind a modest inheritance, a final gift to her grandsons. She explicitly divided the money equally between Julian and me. It wasn't life-changing generational wealth, it was about $100,000 each. But for a young man in his early 20s trying to figure out his place in the world, it was a golden ticket to freedom. Julian, naturally, took his portion of the inheritance and immediately used it to put a massive down payment on his very first luxury sports car. He blew the rest of the cash on extravagant VIP vacations to Ibiza and Miami, subsequently maxing out multiple high-interest credit cards in a desperate bid to maintain the wealthy lifestyle he had artificially constructed for his social media followers. I took a completely different path. I took my portion of the money, moved into a tiny, unheated studio apartment, lived strictly on cheap ramen noodles and tap water for an entire year, and used every single penny to lease a single, used commercial helicopter. I had spent my entire youth studying aviation patterns, and I saw a massive, glaring gap in the market. Emergency medical transport, high-level executive travel, rapid disaster relief coordination. The existing infrastructure in the country was bloated, terribly slow, and horribly inefficient. Nobody was thinking big enough to streamline it. Nobody was willing to take the massive risk. So I thought bigger. I poured my life savings and my grandmother's legacy into founding Trans Global Aviation. The early years of the business were absolutely brutal, bone-crushing work. I worked 20-hour days regularly, sleeping on a broken canvas cot in a freezing, drafty rented hangar out by the regional airfield. And right when the company finally started to gain real traction, securing our first major regional hospital contract, I faced the ultimate soul-destroying betrayal. Mr. Sterling, an early angel investor I had trusted like a second father, tried to orchestrate a vicious hostile takeover. He hired a shark of a corporate lawyer and exploited a tiny, deeply buried loophole in our initial operating agreement. He filed a massive, multi-million-dollar lawsuit designed specifically to bleed me dry and strip me of my own company. It was the absolute darkest period of my life. I was fighting a brutal legal battle that threatened to bankrupt me and destroy my reputation, while desperately trying to keep my pilots paid, my mechanics happy, and my medical transport contracts fulfilled. During the lowest point of that legal nightmare, I went to my parents for support. I didn't go to them asking for a loan, or a bailout, or for them to dip into their 401k. I just needed emotional backing. I needed a mother and a father. I sat at their expensive granite kitchen table, physically exhausted, my eyes bloodshot, and explained the lawsuit that was threatening to tear my life apart. My father just sat there, shaking his head, looking at me like I was a delusional child who had broken a toy. "Arthur, this is exactly what happens when you play pretend in the real world," he said, his voice laced with heavy disappointment. "You aren't a CEO. You are a kid who rented a helicopter and got way in over his head. You need to drop this ridiculous lawsuit, declare bankruptcy immediately, and get a real, stable job with a steady salary. Maybe Julian can pull some strings and get you an entry-level logistics position at his firm." My mother chimed in, equally dismissive. "Your father is right, Arthur. We told you to use that inheritance for a down payment on a house or a nice car. Instead, you threw it away. You need to stop this fantasy before you end up homeless." My own family did not believe I was capable of building anything real. They thought my company was a childish pipe dream, a fantasy I was utilizing to avoid climbing the traditional corporate ladder like Julian. After that devastating conversation at the kitchen table, something inside me permanently snapped. I built an impenetrable steel wall around my professional life. I fired my cheap attorney, hired a ruthless legal firm on contingency, and absolutely annihilated Sterling in federal court. I won the lawsuit, secured 100% full ownership of Trans Global Aviation, and aggressively expanded our operations internationally. Over the next 8 years, we grew from that single beat-up lease chopper to operating heavily in 14 different countries. We acquired regional airlines, built our own maintenance infrastructure, and cornered the market on elite executive transport. Our valuation recently hit $2.8 billion. I quietly bought massive portfolios of commercial real estate, secured massive defense and government contracts, and fundamentally changed the landscape of private global aviation. And I never told my family a single solitary word about any of it. To them, I was still just Arthur, the failure who couldn't afford a car. Back in the present moment, the Thanksgiving gathering in the living room was swelling as more extended relatives arrived. The front door opened again, and Aunt Clara walked in, her piercing voice cutting through the room like a police siren. Clara was the absolute master of the backhanded compliment, the family's resident manipulator who thrived on stirring the pot and watching the chaos unfold. She had recently gone through a bitter divorce and seemed determined to make everyone else as miserable as she was. "Arthur, my sweet boy," Clara cooed loudly, pulling me into a suffocating hug that smelled heavily of cheap floral perfume and expensive gin. She pulled back and looked me up and down with exaggerated pity. "Julian was just telling me at the door that you are still doing the whole public transit thing. You are so incredibly brave walking around downtown at night. I read a horrifying article about a brutal mugging at a bus stop just last week." "I am quite safe, Aunt Clara," I said, stepping back from her grip. "I know how to take care of myself." "Still," she continued, making sure her voice was loud enough to ensure the entire room was listening to her performance. It is simply not safe. A grown man your age, standing alone at bus stops in the freezing rain. Without resources. Without protection. What happens if you have a medical emergency? Car is safety, Arthur. It is independence. It is the absolute bare minimum of adulthood. My dad nodded gravely from his leather armchair, swirling his drink. That is exactly what I keep telling him, Clara. But he refuses to listen to reason. He is stubborn. Remember when he said he was building that aviation business years ago? How is that little hobby project going, Arthur? Are you still pretending to be a CEO of the skies? The business is going very well, actually, I said quietly, keeping my face perfectly neutral. Well enough to finally afford a reliable vehicle yet? Dad pressed hard, leaning forward aggressively. Because I am dead serious about that Honda Flyer I mailed to your apartment. I even printed out the Carfax report. He reached into his tailored slacks, pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, and tossed it onto the coffee table like he was throwing a bone to a stray dog. Nothing fancy, obviously, but it would be a massive step up from waiting in the sleet at your age. My phone buzzed heavily again. Priority red alert vibration. I pulled it out and glanced at the encrypted screen. It was Liam, my executive vice president of global operations. I rapidly typed a quick, secure response, authorizing a massive fuel hedge purchase, and slid the phone back into my pocket. Always staring at that screen, Aunt Clara observed, narrowing her heavily lined eyes. Was that an important business call, dear? Just coordinating some ground logistics for your... What was the name of it? Aviation thing? Logistics, yes. High-level routing, I replied smoothly. Julian snorted loudly from the sofa, adjusting his expensive Rolex. What kind of imaginary logistics require this much frantic phone attention on a national holiday? Honestly, Arthur, you are always so incredibly vague about what you actually do for a living. It's sketchy. I coordinate transportation services, I said, keeping my tone perfectly flat and unbothered. Aunt Clara's eyes suddenly lit up with malicious, mocking glee as she formulated her next insult. Oh, are you an Uber driver? Or one of those food delivery boys? Honey, listen to me, there is absolutely no shame in that. Gig economy work is perfectly respectable for people who are just trying to find their footing in the world. The entire living room erupted into vicious chuckles. My cousin Sarah laughed into her wine glass. My own parents smiled with quiet amusement. They were entirely comfortable with the idea of me as a struggling, impoverished Uber driver. It fit their internal narrative perfectly. It made Julian look significantly taller and more successful. It made their questionable parenting choices seem completely justified. I looked around the room, making eye contact with the faces of the people who shared my exact bloodline, realizing with crystal clarity that they didn't just misunderstand me. They actively, desperately wanted me to fail. The air in the room grew incredibly heavy, static with unspoken tension, and I knew a massive storm was gathering right above our heads. The only question was exactly when it would break. Dinner preparation eventually transitioned into the dining room, and it quickly became a masterclass in passive-aggressive warfare. We all took our designated seats around the massive mahogany table. The spread was extravagant. A massive roasted turkey, endless sides, crystal glasses filled with imported wine. But the food was secondary to the main event, the continued interrogation and systematic humiliation of Arthur. Julian purposely positioned himself at the absolute head of the table, effectively usurping my father, holding court as the successful golden son who had made a spectacular life for himself. He steered every single conversation back to his wealth, his assets, and his superior lifestyle. He casually brought up his exorbitant car payments, loudly complaining about the $1,800 monthly note on his new Porsche, as if it were mere loose change he had found deep in his sofa cushions. He talked at length about the exclusive, biometric-secured parking garage at his new downtown luxury condo building, emphasizing how heavily climate-controlled it was to protect the custom paint jobs on his vehicles. You know, Arthur, Julian said, pausing to take a theatrical sip of his expensive red wine, That single car payment of mine is probably significantly more than your entire rent, isn't it? I mean, your whole monthly rent for that tiny, depressing studio apartment you live in. I do not have a car payment, Julian, I replied, my voice steady, calmly slicing into my turkey. Exactly my point. Julian shot back triumphantly, slamming his hand lightly on the table. Because you physically cannot afford one. It is perfectly okay to admit it, man. You know, not everyone is cut out to be successful in the brutal corporate world. Some people are just biologically destined for the middle of the pack. Or the bottom. My dad poured himself his third glass of whiskey, his face flushed and sweating slightly. I just do not understand what went so catastrophically wrong with you. We raised you two boys in the exact same house. We gave you the exact same foundation. Same private schools, same massive college fund, same networking opportunities. Julian completely thrived. He just got a massive promotion to senior vice president last year. And you, well, look at you. He was always just a bit different, Mom added, her voice dropping into a register of profound sadness, as if she were delivering a tragic eulogy for my wasted potential. Do you all remember how he would spend countless hours out by the regional airport fence as a kid, just watching the cargo planes take off and land? We thought it was a cute little phase. We didn't realize it was a bizarre obsession that would ultimately ruin his career prospects. I liked the mechanics of aviation. I still do, I stated clearly, looking her dead in the eyes. Liking something as a hobby and building a viable, lucrative career from it are two vastly different things in the real world. Uncle Robert chimed in, pointing a dripping piece of asparagus directly at my face. I really liked playing varsity football back in high school. Didn't mean I should have abandoned reality to pursue a contract with the NFL. You have to live in reality, Arthur. You're living in a dream world. Cousin Sarah let out a sharp, incredibly annoying laugh that grated against my nerves. Honestly, maybe if his little aviation business was actually real, he would at least have a cheap company car by now. Do you even have professional business cards, Arthur? A functional website? Derek tried to Google you and your little project once and said absolutely nothing came up. I slowly turned my head to look at Derek, my younger, tech-obsessed cousin who was perpetually attached to his smartphone, currently sitting near the end of the table. We intentionally maintain a very low profile in our sector, I said calmly. Julian scoffed so loudly he nearly choked on his wine. Low profile? Give me a break. That is desperate corporate code for, my company does not exist. Face facts, Arthur. You have utterly wasted a decade of your prime earning years on a pathetic fantasy. Meanwhile, real life, real wealth, and real success are passing you by while you wait at a bus stop. Right at that exact, agonizing moment my phone rang. It wasn't a subtle buzz this time. It was an actual, loud, high-priority ringtone. I glanced at the screen. It was Liam, overriding my Do Not Disturb settings. This meant it was a critical billion-dollar emergency. Excuse me for a moment, I said, calmly standing up and stepping away from the table, moving toward the hallway. Are you absolutely kidding me? Julian called out after me, his voice dripping with intense irritation and disrespect. You are taking a phone call during Thanksgiving dinner? What? Is your Uber passenger getting impatient waiting outside? I completely ignored his childish taunt and answered the secure line. Go ahead, Liam. Talk to me. Arthur. I am so sorry to interrupt the holiday dinner. Liam's voice was sharp, crisp, and intensely professional. But the executive board needs your immediate verbal authorization. The Singapore Ministry of Transport just officially greenlit the defense contract. $95 million over 3 years, with exclusive government access to 15 of our fully equipped medical helicopters. But here's the catch. They need the countersignatures in the next 60 minutes due to the extreme time zone difference and their legislative session. Understood? I said quietly, pacing the hardwood hallway, my mind instantly shifting from family drama to global logistics. Tell the legal department to finalize the DocuSign immediately. I formally authorized the terms. $95 million is acceptable for the initial phase. Proceed with the fleet integration. Done, Liam said, the sound of furious typing echoing in the background. Also, Captain Vance is holding on line 2. He is requesting final clearance for your holiday extraction. Put him through immediately. A brief click, and then the deep, commanding voice of my chief fleet commander came on the secure line. Sir, we are exactly 40 minutes out from the GPS coordinates you provided. Weather is crystal clear. We are maintaining standard VIP formation. Should we circle the perimeter or initiate a direct approach to the primary landing zone? Maintain the direct approach, Captain Vance. The landing zone is the large, clear backyard at the residential address I sent you. I will see you on the ground soon. I ended the call, slipped the phone back into my pocket, and walked slowly back into the dining room. The silence in the room was absolutely deafening. Every single pair of eyes was locked onto me like I was an alien that had just beamed down into their house. Work call? I explained simply, pulling my chair out and sitting back down. Work? My dad repeated, the word tasting violently sour in his mouth. Right? Your imaginary make-believe aviation business. Tell us, Arthur, what could possibly require a phone call in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner? Just some final logistics, I said casually. Closing a government contract. Julian slammed his flat hand onto the mahogany table, violently rattling the expensive silverware and crystal glasses. This is completely ridiculous. You are clinically delusional, Arthur. You are sitting here pretending to be some big-shot, high-powered CEO, and it is honestly incredibly sad to watch. We are your family. You can drop this pathetic act. You do not have government contracts. I am not acting, Julian. Then prove it to us right now. Julian roared, standing up, his face red with uncontrolled anger. Prove you have this massive aviation empire. Show us one single, solitary shred of evidence that you aren't just a broke, miserable guy taking the city bus. Derek, who had been furiously tapping away on his phone beneath the edge of the table, suddenly spoke up, his voice cracking slightly. Guys? Hold on a second. I just Googled his company name again. Trans Global Aviation. And let me guess, absolutely nothing comes up? Dad asked smugly, taking another heavy sip of his whiskey. No, Derek frowned, staring intensely at his glowing screen, his eyes widening in real time. There actually is a company by that exact name. But it's massive, like international massive. It says right here on Bloomberg that they have defense contracts with governments, emergency medical transport divisions, elite executive fleets. Wait, it says their latest Wall Street valuation is $2.8 billion. The entire dining room went dead, terrifyingly silent. You could have heard a pin drop onto the carpet. Then, Julian let out a loud, obnoxious, mocking laugh that broke the tension. See, there it is. Arthur, you absolute idiot. You actually picked the name of a real, multi-billion-dollar global corporation to use as the name for your fake business? That is the most pathetic thing I have ever heard in my life. It says it's a privately held company, Derek continued, scrolling rapidly. The founder's name isn't publicly listed anywhere on the corporate registry. They operate in extreme secrecy. He probably works in their basement mailroom, Aunt Clara sneered, a wicked smile spreading across her face. Or maybe he is a nighttime janitor for them. That is the aviation logistics he does. Arthur, why on earth would you lie to your own blood family like this? I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I simply looked directly at my mother, then slowly shifted my gaze to my father, and finally locked eyes with Julian. I do not work in the mailroom. I founded Trans Global Aviation 10 years ago. I started it with the inheritance money Grandma left me. That $2.8 billion company is 100% mine. The dining room completely and totally lost its collective mind. The explosion of laughter was so loud and chaotic it physically hurt my ears. My dad was literally wiping tears of mirth from his eyes, slapping his knee. My mom looked genuinely terrified, leaning back in her chair as if I had just suffered a violent psychotic break right in front of the turkey. I realized in that exact crystal-clear moment that no amount of spoken words, no amount of logic, would ever convince them of the truth. They needed a physical shock to their system. They needed to see it to believe it. The roaring laughter in the room slowly began to die down, gradually replaced by a thick, suffocating, incredibly uncomfortable tension. My mother leaned across the table, her face pinched with a complex mixture of genuine fear and deep social embarrassment. "Arthur, sweetheart, please, I am begging you to stop this right now," she whispered urgently, reaching out as if to touch my hand, but pulling back at the last second. "Maybe you need to go talk to a medical professional, a licensed therapist. We can help pay for it. This level of severe delusion simply isn't healthy for you." "I am perfectly sane, and I am not delusional, Mom," I said, my voice incredibly steady, entirely devoid of the defensive anger and desperation that used to completely control me when I was a younger man seeking their validation. "Then show us the hard proof," Dad demanded, slamming his fist onto the table again. His patience completely evaporated. "Right here, right now. Pull up your banking statements on your phone. Show me the commercial real estate deeds. Show me a stock portfolio. Show me something, anything real that proves you aren't a complete and utter failure." I casually pulled back my left sleeve and checked my watch. The custom platinum Rolex Daytona, which I usually kept carefully hidden under my tailored cuff precisely to avoid these types of shallow conversations, caught the harsh overhead chandelier light, gleaming brilliantly. "You will have your absolute, undeniable proof in exactly 15 minutes. Julian stood up fully, towering over the dining table, his face twisted in a sneer. "Stop being so damn cryptic, Arthur. What magical event happens in 15 minutes? Is your imaginary billionaire chauffeur coming to pick you up in a solid gold Uber helicopter?" Before I could even form a response, my phone buzzed with an incoming encrypted text from Captain Vance. "10 minutes out, sir. Visual confirmed on the primary landing zone. Note, we may have a severe HOA noise violation on our hands with this approach. Awaiting final authorization." I smiled slightly, a cold, hard smile. "I am the HOA," I rapidly texted back. "Execute the landing." I stood up slowly, deliberately pushing my heavy dining chair back. The harsh scrape of the wood against the hardwood floor echoed loudly in the suddenly quiet room. "If everyone would like to grab their heavy winter coats, I strongly suggest we move out to the back patio. The weather is actually quite nice for a late November evening." "You want us all to go outside?" Cousin Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly, looking at me like I was a dangerous criminal holding a concealed weapon. "Why on earth would we do that?" "To watch 3 of my executive helicopters land directly in our backyard," I stated plainly, looking directly at my father. My dad's face went completely pale for a fraction of a second, and then flushed a deep, incredibly angry crimson red. "You have completely lost your mind. You are insane. You are actually standing in my house, eating my food, and saying 3 real helicopters are going to land in my backyard? This joke has gone way too far, Arthur. I won't tolerate this disrespect." 15 minutes, I corrected him calmly, checking my Rolex again. "Well, 9 minutes now to be exact. And it isn't actually your backyard, Dad. But we can discuss the complex legal semantics of your real estate situation later. Are you coming outside to see the proof you demanded, or not?" I did not wait for a single response. I turned my back on the entire room and walked down the long hallway, grabbing my thick wool coat from the wooden rack, and forcefully pushed open the heavy double-glass doors leading out to the expansive stone patio. The freezing November air hit my face instantly, crisp, biting, and wonderfully sobering. The yard was massive, nearly a full acre of perfectly manicured grass backing up to a line of dense, mature oak trees. It was one of the primary strategic reasons I had legally purchased this specific property through a shell corporation 3 years ago. Behind me, the chaotic murmur of frantic, angry voices grew significantly louder. The family was actually following me out into the cold. I cannot believe we are actually doing this, Julian muttered angrily as he stepped onto the stone patio, aggressively wrapping his expensive designer cashmere coat tightly around himself. We are literally standing outside in the freezing winter, whether to humor the delusions of a madman. Derek held his smartphone up high, the red recording light blinking steadily in the dim light. I am getting this all on high-definition video. When absolutely nothing happens, I am posting this to every platform. You are going to be a viral cautionary tale, Arthur. That is incredibly cruel, Derek, my mother scolded weakly, though she notably made absolutely zero physical effort to tell him to put the phone away or stop recording her son's supposed mental breakdown. She walked cautiously toward me, hovering a few feet away like I was a wild animal that might suddenly snap. Arthur, please, I'm begging you, just come inside. We can forget you ever said any of this crazy stuff. We will get you psychiatric help. Just look at the sky, Mom, I said gently, pointing toward the eastern horizon. We stood there on the patio in absolute, agonizing silence for 5 long minutes. The sun was rapidly beginning to set, casting long, dramatic, dark shadows across the manicured lawn. The tension in the air was so thick and palpable, you could have literally cut it with a knife. My father was pacing back and forth furiously on the stone, muttering aggressively under his breath about the massive embarrassment, about the nosy neighbors, about how he had completely failed as a father to raise a sane son. This is completely absurd, Uncle Robert finally snapped, shivering in his thin jacket. I am going back inside to eat the rest of the turkey. I am not standing out here for another second to humor a fantasy. Wait, Derek said suddenly, his voice dropping an octave. He lowered his phone slightly and tilted his head toward the east. Do you guys hear that? Julian froze mid-step. Hear what? Started as a low, deep, rhythmic thumping. It was a frequency you felt deep in your chest cavity before you actually registered it with your ears. The heavy vibration traveled through the cold air, growing steadily and aggressively louder by the millisecond. Thrum, thrum, thrum. That is just a commercial cargo plane passing over, Dad said, though his voice wavered violently, betraying his sudden, rising panic. The sound rapidly intensified into a deafening, chest-rattling roar. The tops of the massive oak trees at the edge of the property began to violently sway, whipping back and forth as if they were suddenly caught in a localized, Category 3 hurricane. The intense downdraft picked up, blowing dead leaves and patio furniture across the stone in a chaotic frenzy. Arthur, my mother whispered, taking a step back, her eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated terror as the noise became overwhelming. Then we finally saw them, cresting the tree line, sleek, aggressively black, and absolutely massive against the fading purple autumn sky, came 3 Sikorsky 76 executive helicopters. They moved in absolute, terrifyingly perfect military formation. The setting sun glinted sharply off their polished, armored exterior panels. Each one was an absolute masterpiece of modern aviation engineering, worth over $13 million apiece. Oh my dear God! Aunt Clara shrieked over the deafening mechanical noise, dropping to her knees and covering her ears. Julian stumbled violently backward, tripping over an overturned patio chair and falling hard onto the concrete. He didn't even try to get back up. He just sat there in the dirt in his designer suit, staring up at the sky, his jaw completely unhinged. No, 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 no. That is absolutely impossible. The massive helicopters began their synchronized descent, hovering just feet above the expansive lawn. The downdraft was absolutely incredible, tearing fiercely at our clothes and ripping the expensive Thanksgiving decorations right off the back porch railings. My family stood totally frozen, mouths hanging open, their minds entirely and fundamentally incapable of processing the reality that nearly $40 million worth of private aircraft was currently landing in the backyard of the sun they had just called a pathetic failure. The first helicopter touched down with heavy, perfect precision, the landing skids settling deeply into the grass exactly where I had specified. The second and third immediately followed suit, forming a flawless, aggressive triangle. The massive rotors began to wind down, the deafening roar finally dropping to a powerful mechanical whine. The heavy side door of the lead chopper slid open with a sharp hiss. And the storm, the real storm they had brought upon themselves through years of cruelty, was finally here. I thought the worst was over for them. But the absolute truth was, I was just getting started. The heavy side door of the lead Sikorsky S-76 helicopter slid open with a sharp, pneumatic hiss that cut cleanly through the mechanical whine of the rapidly slowing rotors. The intense downdraft was still violently whipping across the meticulously manicured lawn, tearing relentlessly at the expensive designer coats my family wore like protective armor. But their superficial armor was completely and utterly useless now. They stood entirely frozen on the expensive stone patio, their eyes wide with a complex, terrifying mixture of absolute shock and utter incomprehension. From the dark, luxurious leather interior of the aircraft stepped Captain Vance. He was dressed in a pristine, razor-sharp black aviator uniform, the heavy fabric immaculate, with the gold Trans Global Aviation corporate insignia gleaming proudly on his broad chest. He moved with absolute military precision, a man who had flown combat missions and now commanded immense respect in any corporate boardroom or airfield he walked into. Behind him, 5 other highly trained crew members, co-pilots, flight engineers, and elite logistics specialists, filed out in perfect practice synchronization. They did not look like struggling Uber drivers. They did not look like desperate gig economy workers scrambling for a meager salary. They looked exactly like what they were: the elite, highly compensated aviation strike team of a multi-billion-dollar global empire. Captain Vance walked directly through the chaotic, swirling wind, his heavy boots crunching against the frost-covered grass, completely bypassing my paralyzed father, ignoring my mother who was actively clutching her chest in a panic, and stepping right over Julian, who was still sitting pathetically in the freezing dirt where he had fallen. Vance stopped exactly 3 feet in front of me, stood at strict, rigid attention, and delivered a crisp, perfect military salute. "Reporting for duty, Mr. CEO." Captain Vance's deep, authoritative voice boomed, easily carrying over the massive engine noise. "The primary executive fleet has been delivered exactly as requested to the designated coordinates. All aeronautical systems are fully operational. We have comprehensively secured the immediate perimeter. We are completely ready for your VIP extraction whenever you give the final word, sir." I returned his salute with a calm, highly practiced nod, physically feeling the heavy, burning eyes of my entire extended family boring into the side of my face. "Thank you, Captain Vance. Your approach vector was absolutely flawless. Were there any unexpected issues with the regional air traffic control clearance over this heavily restricted suburban airspace?" "None at all, sir," Vance replied, a slight, deeply professional smile touching the corner of his mouth. "The mayor's office personally expedited our designated flight path the absolute second they recognized your registered tail numbers on the radar. The evening weather cooperated beautifully. Though I must admit, sir, in all my years of service, this is the very first time we have ever executed a tactical formation landing at a private residential address for a standard Thanksgiving dinner pickup." "There is a first time for absolutely everything, Captain," I said smoothly, adjusting the cuffs of my coat. My father finally managed to locate his voice. It was a weak, severely trembling sound, completely and entirely stripped of the arrogant, overbearing authority he had wielded so casually at the dining room table just 10 minutes prior. "Arthur," he croaked, taking a hesitant, unsteady step forward, pointing a violently shaking finger at the massive black machines resting heavily on his precious lawn. "Arthur, what in the name of God is this? Who are these people in uniforms? Are you renting these machines for some kind of sick joke? Do you have any idea how much profound legal trouble you are going to be in for pulling a reckless stunt like this in a zoned residential neighborhood?" I turned my body to face my father slowly, meeting his terrified gaze with absolute, chilling calm. "I am not renting anything, Richard. I own them outright. These 3 helicopters are merely a tiny, microscopic fraction of our broader executive fleet. Currently, Trans Global Aviation independently operates 327 commercial aircraft globally. That massive portfolio includes 244 commercial-grade helicopters and 83 private Gulfstream jets strictly reserved for our ultra-high-net-worth clients, international diplomats, and heads of state. Aunt Clara let out a loud, highly dramatic gasp, literally clutching the expensive pearl necklace resting against her chest. You are lying through your teeth. This is an incredibly elaborate, massive prank. You cannot possibly own a global company like that. You take the city bus. We see you at the bus stop. I take the city bus because it actively keeps my personal carbon footprint down, and far more importantly, it keeps me entirely grounded in actual reality, I stated coldly, my voice easily cutting through her rising, frantic hysterics. It actively prevents me from morphing into a superficial, empty person who measures human worth and dignity by the brand of imported metal they park in a driveway. Someone exactly like Julian. Julian desperately scrambled to his feet, his expensive, custom-tailored suit deeply stained with dark winter mud and wet grass. His face was a contorted mask of furious, aggressive denial. This is highly illegal. You cannot just land military-grade transport helicopters in a heavily populated residential neighborhood. I am calling the police right this second. I am having you immediately arrested for reckless endangerment and disturbing the peace. You do not need to call anyone, Julian, Aunt Clara announced triumphantly, pulling her vibrating smartphone from her designer leather purse with a shaky hand. I already dialed 911 the very second those terrifying things appeared over the oak trees. The local authorities are on their way right now. You are going to federal prison, Arthur. You and your little pilot friends are going to be locked up. Right on her vindictive cue, the sharp, piercing wail of police sirens tore through the cold evening air. Two local police cruisers aggressively pulled into the wide driveway, their red and blue emergency lights flashing wildly and reflecting against the brick front of the large house. We heard the sound of heavy boots rushing frantically down the side brick pathway. Two uniformed officers charged forcefully into the backyard, their hands resting highly cautiously on their duty weapons, clearly expecting to find a catastrophic disaster zone or a hostile terrorist threat based on Clara's hysterical phone call. The lead officer, a burly veteran cop named Higgins, forcefully pushed his way onto the stone patio, his eyes growing impossibly wide as he took in the sight of three massive, multi-million-dollar helicopters parked perfectly on the suburban grass. What the hell is going on here? Officer Higgins shouted over the lingering engine noise. Who is directly responsible for these aircraft? This is a massive, unprecedented violation of city zoning ordinances and FAA regulations. My mother rushed forward instantly, suddenly emboldened by the comforting presence of armed law enforcement. Officer, thank goodness you are finally here. My son, Arthur, he has completely lost his mind. He is having a severe mental breakdown. He ordered these dangerous machines to land here to physically intimidate his own family. Arrest him immediately. Officer Higgins turned his stern, highly authoritative gaze directly toward me. He took two aggressive, purposeful steps forward, fully ready to issue harsh commands and potentially draw handcuffs. But as he got closer, the bright exterior patio security lights fully illuminated my face. He stopped dead in his tracks, his boots skidding slightly on the stone. His highly aggressive posture instantly evaporated, entirely replaced by a look of genuine shock and sudden, deep professional deference. Mr. Arthur? Officer Higgins asked, his loud voice drastically dropping in volume to a highly respectful tone. Arthur from Trans Global Corporate? Good evening, Officer Higgins, I said calmly, stepping forward and extending my right hand. It is genuinely good to see you again. How is your daughter doing this semester? Did that specific college fund scholarship we set up through the local police union officially clear to help cover her tuition at the state university? Higgins eagerly grabbed my hand and shook it firmly, completely and totally ignoring my mother who was standing right next to him. She is doing incredibly well, sir. Straight A's in her pre-med courses. My wife and I cannot possibly thank your corporate foundation enough for that generous grant. Sir, I had absolutely no idea this was your family's private residence. The emergency dispatch call reported a rogue aircraft emergency and a potential hostile threat. It is merely a highly coordinated holiday logistics pickup, officer, I assured him smoothly, reaching into my inner coat pocket. I have the officially signed and stamped permits from the regional FAA office and the explicit, documented clearance from the mayor's office right here on my encrypted phone. We are fully compliant with all local noise ordinances for temporary, emergency-designated landing zones. Higgins nodded rapidly, taking a highly respectful step back. Of course, sir. Absolutely. If you have the mayor's explicit clearance and the FAA paperwork, there is absolutely zero issue here. My deepest apologies for the unnecessary interruption. Have a truly wonderful Thanksgiving, Mr. Arthur. Officer Higgins turned sharply to his bewildered partner, signaled for him to stand down immediately, and tipped his uniform hat toward me. False alarm, folks. Everything is perfectly legal here. Have a good evening. And just like that, the police turned their backs and walked away, leaving my family completely, utterly, and devastatingly defenseless. The crushing reality of the situation finally slammed into them with the unstoppable physical force of a runaway freight train. The local authorities weren't going to save them. Julian's arrogant, loud bravado wasn't going to save them. Aunt Clara's highly manipulative lies couldn't twist this specific narrative to her advantage. They were standing in the overwhelming presence of a man who held significantly more power, wealth, and systemic influence in his left hand than their entire combined bloodline had accumulated in 5 generations. My mother's legs physically gave out. She sank heavily into one of the wrought iron patio chairs, her face completely drained of all color, staring at me as if I were a terrifying stranger who had just violently broken into her home. "Arthur," she whispered, thick tears finally welling in her widened eyes. Why didn't you just tell us the truth? We are your blood family. If you actually had this kind of massive success, a normal corporate salary, a real, tangible business, why did you maliciously let us worry about your future? Why did you let us pay for your dinners? You never actually worried about me, Mom, I said, my voice completely cold and entirely devoid of any residual childhood emotion. You strictly worried about how my perceived poverty negatively reflected on your fragile social status. You worried about what your wealthy friends at the country club would whisper behind your back. Every single time I tried to talk to you about my business years ago, you cruelly dismissed me. You explicitly told me to quit. You told me I was a massive failure. You demanded I get a real job to stop embarrassing you. So, I completely stopped trying to convince you. I built my massive empire in total, absolute silence while you all sat around proudly counting Julian's leased cars. Julian aggressively clenched his fists, his face turning a highly ugly, blotchy shade of purple. This is not fair. You did this on purpose. You deliberately humiliated us. You set a sick, twisted trap. You walked in here acting poor just so you could violently rub this massive wealth in our faces. I didn't set a trap, Julian, I replied smoothly, stepping significantly closer to him until he was forced to physically look up into my eyes. You meticulously built the trap yourself with your unchecked arrogance. You stepped blindly into it with your profound cruelty. And you securely locked the iron cage yourself when you aggressively demanded proof of my success. I merely handed you the key. The bitterly cold November wind continued to howl aggressively across the expansive yard. But the profound, bone-deep chill radiating from my family had absolutely nothing to do with the dropping temperature. My father, Richard, had always been a deeply stubborn man who instinctively led with blinding anger whenever he felt his patriarchal authority slipping away. Even now, faced with the indisputable multimillion-dollar physical evidence of my overwhelming success sitting on his lawn, his massive, fragile ego refused to simply surrender to reality. He aggressively puffed out his chest, his face red with exertion, and marched purposefully toward me. You listen to me right now, Arthur? My dad growled, pointing his thick, shaking finger mere inches from the bridge of my nose. I do not care how much corporate money you have hoarded away. I do not care if you own 300 helicopters or 3,000. You do not get to come into my personal house, blatantly disrespect your mother, publicly humiliate your older brother, and maliciously disrupt our sacred holiday. This is my private property. You are standing on my highly valuable real estate. I want these damn noisy machines off my lawn right this exact second. Or I swear to God Almighty I will drag you and your company to court for illegal trespassing and property damage. I did not flinch. I did not take a single step back. I simply looked at the angry, aging man who had relentlessly mocked my biggest dreams for a solid decade, and I felt absolutely nothing but a profound, overwhelming sense of cold, detached pity. Actually, Richard, I said, intentionally and permanently dropping the respectful title of Dad. It is my real estate. The silence that immediately followed that specific statement was significantly heavier than the combined weight of the armored helicopters sitting on the grass. My dad blinked rapidly, his aggressive hand dropping slowly and awkwardly to his side. What the hell are you talking about? I bought this suburban house 30 years ago. I hold the deed. And you almost lost it completely 3 years ago. I stated clearly, projecting my voice so every single terrified relative standing on the patio could hear the absolute, unvarnished truth. You and Mom made some terrible, highly reckless financial investments in the stock market. You aggressively maxed out your multiple credit lines trying desperately to keep up appearances for your country club friends. The bank officially initiated the foreclosure process. You were exactly 3 weeks away from being legally evicted and having your expensive furniture tossed onto the public street by the county sheriff's department. My mother let out a loud, strangled sob, violently burying her face in her trembling hands. The massive, shameful financial secret she had so desperately guarded from the extended family was suddenly laid entirely bare under the harsh, unforgiving patio security lights. Your desperate bankruptcy lawyer called my corporate legal team to attempt to finalize a massive debt restructuring. I continued relentlessly, showing absolutely zero mercy. But your cheap lawyer didn't realize who my elite legal team actually represented. When I found out you were losing the family house, I didn't gloat. I didn't call you to mock your failure. I quietly authorized my massive commercial real estate subsidiary, Trans Global Properties, to step in immediately. I purchased this entire estate directly from the holding bank in pure cash, paid off all of your outstanding, massive tax liens, and stopped the legal foreclosure dead in its tracks. My dad's jaw was literally hanging open. He looked physically ill, swaying slightly on his feet. No, that's impossible. The bank sent us an official letter saying they restructured our primary mortgage loan. We have been making our monthly payments to a new corporate management group. You have been making heavily subsidized, significantly below market rent payments directly to my corporation. I corrected him sharply, my voice cutting like glass. I am your legal landlord. I strictly own the roof over your head. I own the paved driveway where Julian parks his flashy cars. I own the very grass those helicopters are currently resting on. I single-handedly saved you from complete financial ruin, aggressively protected your fragile credit scores from total destruction, and gave you absolute living stability. I did all of that 3 full years ago, and not once, not a single solitary time, did any of you bother to ask if I was doing okay. You were so absolutely, blindly certain I was a massive failure that you never even considered the mathematical possibility that the son you mocked was the invisible billionaire keeping you afloat. Uncle Robert, who had been aggressively criticizing my life choices all evening, suddenly looked very small and pathetic inside his cheap winter coat. Cousins Sarah and Derek had retreated to the far, dark corner of the patio, staring at me with incredibly wide, completely terrified eyes. Julian, however, was still desperately, tragically fighting for scraps of relevance. So what? He spat, his voice cracking horribly. You bought a house through a shell company. Congratulations. You're a sneaky landlord. That doesn't make you inherently better than me. I worked tirelessly for my corporate salary. I earned my massive promotion. I built my career. I own my life. I slowly turned my full, undivided attention to my older brother, the supposed golden child. the impossible benchmark of traditional success my parents had used as a weapon to beat me down for years. Since we are completely abandoning the concept of polite family secrets tonight, Julian, let's talk openly about your massive, crushing mountain of consumer debt. Julian physically recoiled, taking a rapid step backward, holding his hands up defensively. Shut up. Stop right now. You don't know anything about my personal finances. I know absolutely everything, I countered smoothly, taking a step toward him. When my firm was doing routine background due diligence for a potential corporate acquisition in your sector, your name popped up in a standard deep dive credit sweep. You do not own those 3 luxury cars currently sitting in my driveway, Julian. You leased the white Porsche at a highly predatory interest rate you can barely afford on your salary. The Lamborghini and the Range Rover are aggressively financed to the absolute hilt, and you are currently 3 full months behind on the payments for both of them. You are completely financially underwater. Your glamorous, highly curated lifestyle is a fragile house of cards financed entirely by crippling credit debt. You are exactly 1 missed paycheck away from total, unrecoverable bankruptcy. Julian's face drained of all color, turning a sickly, pale white. He looked frantically at our parents, but they were far too devastated by their own massive exposure to offer him any protection or comfort. You sat at my dining table tonight, I continued, my voice echoing loudly off the brick walls of the house. And you relentlessly mocked me for taking the city bus. You laughed at me for being poor. But the harsh reality is, Julian, the platinum watch currently sitting on my wrist is worth significantly more than your entire, combined net worth. I take the bus because I have absolutely nothing left to prove to anyone in this world. You aggressively buy luxury cars because you have absolutely nothing else of value to offer the world. Then, I slowly turned my cold gaze toward Aunt Clara. She immediately shrank back against the brick wall, tightly clutching her designer purse against her chest like a protective shield. She knew exactly what was coming, and she was terrified. And Aunt Clara? I said softly, the quiet tone carrying a highly lethal, undeniable threat. Do not think for a single second I forgot about your deeply toxic role in this family dynamic. After your incredibly messy divorce, your final legal settlement didn't quite cover your extravagant country club lifestyle, did it? Clara swallowed hard, her eyes darting around frantically for a physical escape route. Arthur, please. I beg you. This is private family business. We don't need to air dirty laundry in front of everyone. You absolutely love dirty laundry, I fired back, my voice rising in power. 4 years ago, you sat in this exact living room and deliberately, maliciously manipulated my parents. You aggressively convinced them that my struggling aviation business was a massive legal liability. You told them that if I got sued, the corporate creditors would come after their personal assets. You manipulated them into quietly, secretly writing me entirely out of their will and their inheritance documents. You convinced them to leave absolutely everything to Julian, hoping Julian would share the wealth with you when they eventually passed away. My father snapped his head forcefully toward Clara, his eyes wide with betrayal. How do you know about the revised will, Arthur? We explicitly told the lawyer to never tell anyone. I have incredibly excellent corporate lawyers, I said simply. I knew the exact moment your pen hit the paper. And you know what the absolute saddest part of that betrayal is? I didn't even care about the money. I was already a billionaire. I cared deeply about the complete, total lack of parental loyalty. I cared about the sickening fact that my own parents were so incredibly easily poisoned against me. I stood tall in the absolute center of the patio, completely surrounded by the violently shattered egos and exposed, toxic lies of the people who unfortunately shared my blood. You aggressively demanded proof of my life. You desperately wanted to see a massive salary. You wanted to see undeniable success. Well, here it is in all its glory. Look at the multi-million-dollar helicopters. Look at the legal deed to this massive house. Look at the undeniable reality of who I actually am. I am the sole CEO of a multi-billion-dollar logistics empire, and every single one of you is exactly who you were yesterday. Bitter, deeply superficial, and entirely dependent on pathetic illusions. The absolute, crushing devastation on the cold stone patio was entirely complete. There was absolutely no more frantic arguing. There was no more cruel, mocking laughter. The arrogant, highly superior masks they had worn so incredibly proudly for decades had been violently and permanently ripped away, leaving absolutely nothing behind but raw, humiliating, undeniable truth. My mother finally broke completely. She didn't just casually cry. She collapsed entirely under the massive, suffocating weight of her own profound regret. She dropped heavily to her knees on the freezing cold stone. The incredibly expensive designer dress she cared so desperately about aggressively soaking up the freezing winter moisture and dirt. She reached out with wildly trembling hands, desperately trying to grab the hem of my tailored wool coat. "Arthur, please," she openly, violently sobbed. Her voice a ragged, desperate, animalistic plea that echoed painfully over the low, steady hum of the massive helicopter engines. "I am so incredibly sorry. I am so deeply, profoundly sorry. We simply didn't know. We couldn't possibly see past our own foolish, blinding pride. You are my beautiful son. You are my brilliant, incredibly wonderful son. Please, I beg you, forgive us for what we have done. We can fix this massive mistake. We can be a real, loving family again. We will immediately tear up the old, hateful will. We will change absolutely everything. I will do whatever you want." My father stood heavily beside her, his broad, previously intimidating shoulders completely, tragically slumped. The fierce, highly demanding patriarch who used to terrorize me was completely gone, instantly replaced by a hollow, completely broken old man who suddenly, terrifyingly realized he was entirely at the financial mercy of the specific son he had carelessly discarded. "She is absolutely right, Arthur," he choked out, hot tears openly streaming down his weathered, aging face. "I was entirely wrong. I was so incredibly, historically wrong about you and your potential. I let my massive, stupid ego completely blind me. Please let us make this right today. Stay here with us. Send the helicopters away. Come back inside the warm house, and let us have a proper Thanksgiving dinner together as a family. We can start completely over." I looked down at my mother, who was practically groveling on the freezing ground, and then slowly looked up at my father's desperate, pleading, tear-stained face. 10 long years ago, if they had offered me this exact, tearful apology, I would have openly wept with profound joy. I would have gladly given everything I owned in the world just to hear them finally say they were genuinely proud of me. But I wasn't that desperate 22-year-old kid anymore. The desperate, heavily approval-seeking boy had died a slow, painful death in that freezing, drafty airplane hangar years ago. The hardened, incredibly powerful man standing before them today was deeply forged in the fires of betrayal, massive corporate warfare, and absolute, uncompromising self-reliance. "You don't actually want to fix our family, Mom?" I said, my voice shockingly, terrifyingly calm, completely and utterly devoid of any lingering anger or malice. "You solely want to fix your highly convenient proximity to extreme power. You are not apologizing right now because you suddenly, magically realize you were horribly cruel to your youngest son. You are apologizing because your secret landlord just landed $39 million worth of private aircraft on your front lawn. And you are absolutely, paralyzingly terrified of losing your highly comfortable, subsidized life." She shook her head violently, sobbing even harder, gasping for air. "No, that isn't true at all. I love you. I have always deeply loved you, Arthur." "If you truly loved me," I replied incredibly softly, taking a highly deliberate step back so her grasping hands fell emptily away from my coat, "you would have loved and respected the poor man taking the city bus just as fiercely as you suddenly love the billionaire CEO. But you didn't. Your parental love was entirely, sickeningly conditional. It was strictly, aggressively dependent on my ability to perform the concept of success exactly the way you demanded it. And I absolutely refused to be a willing participant in that highly toxic transaction anymore." I turned away from my violently weeping parents and looked directly at Julian. He was staring blankly, emptily at the frozen ground, utterly and completely defeated, the crushing, terrifying reality of his impending financial ruin finally taking full hold of his arrogant mind. I had absolutely no words left to give him. His ultimate punishment was simply the pathetic, debt-ridden life he had built for himself. I walked highly purposefully past all of them, stepping confidently through the heavy, sliding glass doors and back into the warm, turkey-scented house. The sudden, incredibly heavy quiet of the dining room was highly jarring after the chaotic drama of the patio. The massive, extravagant Thanksgiving feast was still sitting exactly where we left it on the mahogany table, perfectly, beautifully arranged, but rapidly growing cold. Captain Vance had silently, respectfully followed me inside, standing at strict attention by the doorway, his hands firmly clasped behind his back, waiting for my final orders. "Captain Vance," I said, pointing a firm finger toward the heavily laden dining table. "Grab the large serving platters. Take the entire turkey, the sweet potatoes, the stuffing, and the highly expensive imported wine. Pack absolutely all of it up right now." Vance raised a single, surprised eyebrow but did not hesitate for a microsecond. "Yes, sir," immediately initiating food recovery and transport protocols. Within 2 highly efficient minutes, Vance and one of the trained flight engineers had rapidly, expertly packed the entire Thanksgiving feast into specialized insulated transport containers. My family watched through the large glass doors, completely and utterly paralyzed, as I literally, physically stripped the harvest directly from their table. It was a deeply, profoundly symbolic gesture, definitively reclaiming the massive energy, the wasted time, and the emotional resources I had foolishly wasted for years trying to win their fake affection. I confidently walked back out onto the freezing patio. My parents watched me with hollow, completely devastated, incredibly empty eyes. My dedicated aviation crew has been flying complex, highly dangerous logistical routes for 10 straight hours today, I announced loudly to the silent, freezing yard. They have willingly sacrificed their own holiday to ensure the total safety and massive success of my global empire. They actively deserve a proper, hot Thanksgiving meal far more than absolutely anyone standing on this patio right now. I did not wait for a desperate response. I did not offer a final, highly dramatic, emotional goodbye. I simply turned my back on the incredibly toxic people who had aggressively tried to break my spirit, walked confidently across the frozen, crushed grass, and climbed into the highly luxurious, leather-lined cabin of the Leda 76 helicopter. Captain Vance quickly secured the heavy, armored door behind me with a loud thud, permanently sealing out the freezing winter wind and the pathetic, haunting sound of my mother's continuous crying. I securely strapped myself into the comfortable leather executive seat and slid the heavy noise-canceling headset over my ears. "Sir." Vance's highly professional voice crackled cleanly and clearly over the internal comms. "All recovered cargo is securely stowed. The main cabin is fully pressurized. We are completely ready for immediate liftoff. What is our final destination tonight?" I looked deeply out the reinforced, bulletproof window. My family looked incredibly small, pathetic, and deeply insignificant standing down there in the dark, entirely surrounded by the massive, empty suburban house that I legally owned. "Take us up, Captain," I ordered smoothly. "Plot a direct, high-speed course for the corporate jet waiting at the regional airfield. We are flying directly to the private Hawaii resort tonight. Full holiday pay, absolute premium corporate benefits, and a proper, massive Thanksgiving dinner on the beach for the entire flight crew." The long, luxurious flight to our private corporate resort in Hawaii was the most peaceful, profoundly healing journey of my entire existence. We happily ate the confiscated Thanksgiving turkey at 35,000 feet in the lavish, highly comfortable cabin of my flagship Gulfstream jet. My dedicated crew laughed loudly, shared wonderful stories of their own loving families, and enthusiastically toasted to our continued, massive corporate success. When we finally landed smoothly in Maui, the warm, highly welcoming ocean breeze was a spectacular, beautiful contrast to the bitter, freezing, incredibly hostile environment of the patio I had permanently left behind. I spent 3 full, uninterrupted days sitting quietly on the pristine white sand, listening to the rhythmic, crashing waves, completely and totally disconnected from the highly toxic expectations that had violently haunted me for over a decade. My personal encrypted phone, however, did not stop aggressively vibrating. Over those 72 hours, I received precisely 147 desperate text messages, 32 highly emotional voicemails, and dozens of frantic, pleading emails. My mother aggressively begged for a second chance, wildly promising she would immediately go to intensive therapy. My father sent incredibly long, rambling messages apologizing profusely for his massive ego and desperately asking for highly sensitive financial advice regarding his retirement accounts. Cousins Sarah and Derek sent pathetic, groveling apologies, explicitly confirming that Derek had immediately, permanently deleted the video he was recording out of sheer, unadulterated terror of my massive legal team suing him into oblivion. And Julian? Julian didn't text to apologize for his cruelty. He texted to desperately, pathetically ask if I could give him a massive corporate loan because the aggressive repo men were actively looking for his Lamborghini and his credit cards were completely maxed out. I did not reply to a single, solitary one of them. Total, absolute silence is the most powerful, impenetrable, indestructible boundary a person can ever establish against toxic individuals. Fast forward exactly 6 months. The massive emotional dust had finally settled, and the harsh, unforgiving reality of their terrible choices had permanently, irrevocably altered their lives. Julian's carefully constructed, highly fragile house of cards predictably and spectacularly collapsed. His highly expensive luxury cars were aggressively repossessed by the banks, totally destroying his credit score. Without the flashy vehicles to artificially maintain his fake image, his superficial, highly wealthy friends immediately abandoned him. He was forcefully required to drastically downsize his entire life, moving out of his luxury downtown loft and quietly renting a cheap, highly depressing apartment in a much less desirable zip code. He was finally, painfully learning the brutal, unforgiving value of $1. Aunt Clara faced her own spectacular, highly humiliating downfall. After I explicitly exposed her vicious, highly illegal manipulation regarding the inheritance documents, the extended family completely and totally turned on her. She was quietly but firmly ostracized from all future family gatherings. Her highly toxic gossip no longer tolerated by relatives who finally realized how deeply destructive and venomous she truly was. She ended up entirely alone, exactly as she deserved. As for my parents, they eventually flew out to the city and desperately attempted to visit my massive corporate headquarters in person. They walked nervously into the towering, multi-million-dollar glass lobby of Trans Global Aviation, completely overwhelmed by the sheer, terrifying scale of the empire their discarded son had built. The front desk security respectfully but incredibly firmly informed them that the CEO was completely unavailable without a highly restricted scheduled appointment. I watched them closely on the high-definition security cameras from my massive corner office on the 42nd floor. They looked so incredibly small, so incredibly lost, and so deeply regretful. I instructed my top executive assistant to go down to the lobby and hand them a highly secure, carefully drafted legal envelope. Inside was a formal, legally binding document officially transferring the absolute deed of their suburban house directly into their names, completely free and clear of any outstanding mortgages or financial liens. I officially gave them their house back. But securely attached to the deed was a short, typed letter setting an absolute, unbreakable, permanent boundary. I have fully paid your massive debts, and I have completely secured your home. You will never have to worry about the terror of foreclosure or money again. But my financial charity does absolutely not buy you access to my life, my profound peace, or my valuable energy. I genuinely wish you health and happiness in your remaining years, but I am respectfully, permanently stepping away from this highly toxic family dynamic. Do not ever contact my corporate offices or my personal numbers again. I watched closely on the high-definition monitor as my mother slowly read the letter, covered her mouth in absolute horror, and quietly, heavily wept in the pristine lobby. My father put his arm around her shaking shoulders, finally realizing with absolute, terrifying finality that they had gained a physical house but permanently, irrevocably lost a son. They slowly turned around and walked out through the massive revolving glass doors, out of my corporate building, and out of my life forever. I stepped away from the security monitors and walked slowly over to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my office. The sprawling, massive city moved like a tiny, highly intricate clockwork mechanism far below me. I was 32 years old. I possessed immense wealth that most normal people could not even begin to comprehend. I had incredible power, massive global influence, and an incredible, highly dedicated team of thousands of people who deeply respected my strong leadership. But as I stood there, looking out over the beautiful, glowing skyline, I realized that true, undeniable wealth had absolutely nothing to do with the massive numbers in my offshore bank accounts, the highly valuable properties I owned, or the massive fleet of aircraft currently crossing the globe under my corporate banner. True wealth was the absolute, unshakable freedom to completely walk away from highly toxic environments without looking back. True wealth was possessing the incredible emotional fortitude to look directly at the people who actively tore you down and say, "I no longer require your validation to exist. I didn't need to completely destroy my family to win. I just needed to outgrow them so incredibly spectacularly that their hateful opinions simply ceased to matter." Sometimes the most profound, deeply satisfying revenge isn't screaming, physically fighting, or trying desperately to prove your immense worth to people who are entirely committed to misunderstanding you. The ultimate, absolute revenge is building a beautiful, massively successful life in total, brilliant silence, and letting your undeniable, overwhelming reality speak so incredibly loudly that it completely shatters their fragile illusions forever. I used to take the city bus strictly because I was desperately trying to stay grounded. Today, I still take the bus occasionally, not to hide from the world, but to vividly remind myself of the hungry, highly determined young man I used to be. The man who owned absolutely nothing, but completely controlled his own destiny. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far. You're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. Have you ever faced something highly similar with your own toxic family? Have you ever had to strategically draw a hard, incredibly painful line in the sand to completely protect your own peace and future? Share your deeply personal story in the comments below. I read every single one of them. And please, do not forget to rigidly like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Remember, your ultimate worth is never, ever defined by the broken people who flatly refuse to see your immense value. Keep building your massive empire in total silence.